Hey, everybody. It's Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin. Welcome to Resistance Live for the 9th of September, 2019, 9/9/19. Wow. It was a heck of a weekend. And I've got, like, once again, a mountain of issues to cover here. Lots of things to discuss. I think the place that we probably got to start is with this announcement from Jerry Nadler about formalizing impeachment proceedings, because we've had a lot of questions about that. So there's going to be a meeting of House Judiciary on Thursday at 8 a.m., which apparently is going to be a meeting where they're going to kind of announce, in some formal way that they're pursuing impeachment. And the result of that seems to be able to lend a little bit more leverage into the fact that they are seeking testimony from additional witnesses. So let me just say this. It's not like it's going to change the process that dramatically, but it apparently is designed so that there can be some way, basically, to allow for greater scrutiny of witnesses and evidence. And so that includes things like grand jury testimony. We've talked about this on the broadcast a whole bunch before, that when there are formalized impeachment proceedings, there's an opportunity then to pursue grand jury material in ways that it could not be pursued prior to that. So this announcement of, like, the formalization of impeachment proceedings, it doesn't really change what's been happening. Like, the investigations continue to be ongoing. It does allow for a little bit more procedural flexibility. So that, again, is at 8 a.m. on Thursday. There's apparently going to be sort of like a formal vote that says in House Judiciary that impeachment has begun. But I want to just remind you all that that is more to get access to evidence than it has to do with any big change in the ongoing process of the House. I, for one, however, will say this. I'm just really, really glad that, the House is going to be back in session, that we're going to have finally a little bit more movement. This August recess has been incredibly painful for everyone, not to mention that the president's decompensation in real time has been incredibly difficult. So we just have a lot from this standpoint that we want to see progress forward on, because I think for all of us, not just from the standpoint of the preservation of democracy, but like our sanity, we need to see some more progress here. And so that is apparently the direction in which we're headed. I'm going to tag team that with the issue of Don McGahn, because a number of you have asked me in the last few days of the broadcast whether there's an update on Don McGahn's testimony. So I will remind you all, House Judiciary went to court. They filed a lawsuit on the 7th of August to compel Don McGahn's testimony under the subpoena that had previously been issued. The deal with that, again, this is one of the reasons why I have said over and over again, this process moved way too slow from the moment the Mueller report dropped in March until now. Lawsuits take time. And unfortunately, there's going to have to be briefing on this. There's going to have to be a hearing in front of the judge. And a month, which is basically where we are right now, from the filing of that lawsuit, is not long enough in traditional court proceedings to get a result. So while there is pressure being levied, and obviously the vote to kind of, like, quote unquote formalize impeachment is going to make a little bit more of a difference there, the likelihood at this stage that we're going to have some big ruling that's going to put Don McGahn in front of House Judiciary in the near future, I'll just call it like another 4 weeks, is unlikely. At the bare minimum, we would have expected, a 20 to 30 day return period on that lawsuit, which usually means, like, you file it, you serve it, and then there's a period of time for the defendant to answer or respond. We are barely at that marker right now. So the delay in McGahn's testimony is the result of the nature of the judicial system. But obviously the formalization of impeachment proceedings will lend a little bit more leverage there. Okay. So that's that. Okay. Oh my goodness. It's like, I looked over my list for this morning and I was like, I can't believe the weekend we had. It's just like crazy. Okay. So Mark Sanford announced that he's running for president as a Republican against Trump, that he's going to try to primary Trump. You all will remember that Mark Sanford was the governor who claimed oh my goodness. It's just, it's like you look back on recent history and you're kind of like, okay, we thought it was bad then. Let's look at where we are now. Okay. So Mark Sanford was the governor of North Carolina. Disappeared. Staff said he was hiking the Appalachian Trail. Turned out he was in Argentina with his mistress. his marriage fell apart. His wife, I mean, there's like a whole saga here, okay? And then he came forward and said he was working on all these family issues with, this organization in Washington, D.C., C Street, to help him restore his morality. Well, C Street is the religious organization. It's not really religious. It's like the Christian organization that is the subject of the documentary, The Family, which we talked about several weeks ago on this broadcast. Mark Sanford is the center of episode 2 of The Family. So if you have not yet gone and watched it on Netflix, I highly encourage you to do that. It will scare the pants off of you. All of you will remember me talking about this a few weeks ago, will recall that I said that it would. I do not want to say that anybody trying to primary Trump is a bad thing, but I will also just say we do not want Mark Sanford to be the Republican nominee nor the Republican president, for a lot of really frightening reasons, having to do with the idea that, like Jesus Christ is here to make everybody rich and to secure the power of white people and all that other sort of stuff, of which Mark Sanford is a part. So there's it's a very strange, bizarre development. And I will just add that I think anybody trying to primary Trump is not a bad thing for our side of the fence. However, I will remind you all, if you did not watch the broadcast late last week, that we do have this developing situation right now inside the GOP where they are canceling primaries in certain states. And they are doing it because they do not want a serious primary challenge to Trump. So, whether or not Mark Sanford will even have an opportunity to be on a ballot in some of these locations, thanks to the local Republican parties who are working, of course, with the national, even though the RNC doesn't make those determinations, is anybody's guess. And it's all very disturbing. That's the evergreen tweet for today. It's all very disturbing. Okay. So, all right. In any event, that's the Mark Sanford news. In other developing news over the weekend, we had this breaking scandal out of Trump's resort in Turnberry. Late Friday night, Natasha Bertrand broke a story that the U.S. Air Force, on their way back from a mission, rather than stopping in the usual places like a Marriott or a Hyatt or somewhere that's a U.S. Air Force base in Europe, had been diverted to Trump's resort in Turnberry. Which, by the way, means that, money that the Air Force is spending goes directly into Trump's pockets. We also have this developing bit of news that while Turnberry had lost a mountain of money in the years leading up to Trump's election and in 2017, they're now turning a profit. And so the Air Force made an announcement late yesterday, that they were going to they were very concerned about this and they were going to look into it. Well, the bit of background breaking news that hasn't gotten nearly as much play is that for 2.5 months, there's been a request from Congress for information to the Department of Defense about their spending at Trump resorts that has not been replied to. So you have to take everything the Air Force is saying now in light of Natasha Bertrand's reporting with a little bit of grain of salt, because it's very clear that at least the DOD knew that there was an inquiry into whether or not Department of Defense money was being spent at Trump resorts, and has not dealt with that. So, again, it's yet another layer of corruption, yet another issue concerning emoluments, yet another level of investigation that should be investigated by the Congress. And, of course, the public pressure on this will hopefully bring more disinfectant to the situation, sunshine being the great disinfectant. But all that said, this is not actually, in some sense, new to the DOD or to the Congress. It may be new to the general public, which it is, because we didn't know about this pending letter. But all that said, it's just yet again a sign of the degree to which the swamp is the swamp, and now they're using Department of Defense money to pay the president to line his pockets. It's incredibly foul. And it's also not at all surprising. So that's that. All right. Okay. Coming out of the hurricane last week, as you all know, the Bahamas were decimated by Dorian. There is some breaking news about this particular issue that has Stephen Miller's foul little Nazi hands all over it, which is that Bahamian refugees are being turned away from Florida notwithstanding the fact that they've gotten on the boat and have been told that they will be welcomed if they do not have current visas. So what that means effectively is that as they are being turned away, it means like families who have lost everything are now basically being confined to the islands in the Bahamas that are non-functional. This, by the way, smacks once again of the worst kinds of racist immigration policies that we have ever seen in this administration. And it also fundamentally guarantees that at least some of these people who are being turned away will die. So again, it's until Stephen Miller is out of power, until this president is out of power, these kinds of disgusting developments are going to continue. Okay. All right. The other, I just like again, I'm sorry. I'm looking at the list of my notes and my research right now going like, it's just one fiasco after another today. I'm sorry. I wish it wasn't. Okay. We had a bit of breaking news yesterday that, as you remember, this famous Oval Office meeting that Trump had with the Russians, where like we didn't know about it until Russian media leaked the pictures of him standing in the Oval Office laughing with the Russian ambassador, with Sergei Kislyak and Lavrov. Do you remember this? So it turns out that the CIA was so afraid of the fact that the president had compromised security, like top secret security information. You also remember this was the meeting where he disclosed that there was this stuff about, how he had gotten information from Israel, and that, he basically disclosed information that could compromise lives. Turns out that after that meeting, the CIA extracted from Russia a very highly placed spy that the US had been using to gain intelligence on what the Russians were doing. And they did it because they were afraid that the president had compromised our intelligence system so much that that person might be murdered. Once again, not surprising, not like this president stops himself from telling the Russians anything and everything, right? But this is how serious that meeting was. It literally could have cost lives. For all we know, it did cost lives. That's the really frightening part. But we have confirmation as of yesterday, the CIA pulled one of our highest, most valuable assets out of the Russian government for fear that that person would be murdered because the president of the United States didn't keep his mouth shut to the Russians. That one makes me really angry. I'll just say that. It makes me really angry. It's like our entire national security apparatus is being compromised because we have this person in office. Again, not surprising, but lives are on the line, right? And these are, in many instances, with the way our intelligence services work, these are assets that have been cultivated over years. These are intelligence relationships that have been built over time, and we've lost them. And once those people are gone, again, we're behind the 8 ball in terms of building all of this back up. So that is profoundly disturbing. Also profoundly disturbing is that apparently the president arranged a meeting with the Taliban at Camp David in the week of the 18th anniversary of 9/11, which he subsequently canceled and then tweeted out about, which also was a mass intelligence violation because he suddenly finally realized that the Taliban were killing people. This in and of itself is just a huge insult. In addition to all the other layers of what go along with this, it's a huge insult to the families of people who lost people in 9/11 and first responders and people who have died since as first responders and their families. Anyone who was injured. It's just a slap in the face, and on top of it, just stupid. So once again, there's sort of like the public and international shame about this is kind of astonishing. Okay, we had a couple of questions about shoring up democracy and where we can direct action right now. So you all have heard me over the last couple of days, and I have a couple other things I'm going to talk about. So just know this. You've all heard me over the last couple of days, couple of weeks, really, talking about the importance of 2020. Many of you are also asking now, what do you say when you call? So let me just say this. Congress is back in session now. We of course, as you all remember, had this whole plan that we put out back in July about how to best use the August recess, how to show up in local offices, how to make a difference, how to talk to staffers. And I know many of you went out there and did that, which is awesome. Now that they're back in session, honestly, this is another moment to lift up your phone calls about the importance of removing the president. And it's not just, this is the other thing about it. There are other things we're going to talk about in a minute that occurred over this weekend that really display just the absolute insanity of the president. And, I will just say this, okay? I said it last week. I feel it's important to say it again. He can be mentally unstable and decompensating in real time and also simultaneously incredibly corrupt. Those two things can exist in the same plane. And so the key here, in my mind, for how we activate at this moment in time, now that Congress is going to be back in session, is that in every phone call we have to talk about both the need for his removal from the standpoint of stability, as well as the vast corruption and massive number of impeachable offenses that exist out there. There's no loss at this point of reasons for this president to be removed from office. There's literally no, some of us have listed dozens at this point of impeachable offenses that could potentially apply to this president. And they're growing every day. I personally think that at this moment in time, and again, I know you guys get tired of this, but this is the point of what I'm saying right now. It is a participatory democracy. It does not function, and we cannot save it if we don't participate. So the ongoing effort, and this is the slog, those of you who were watching the broadcast all the way back in early 2017 will remember that what I said all along was that it was a marathon and not a sprint. We're in the 20th mile now of this marathon, and we can't stop. And even though we're tired, and even though we're exhausted, and even though we're traumatized, and even though it's incredibly difficult some days to kind of get your head up off the pillow and keep going and keep making your phone calls and keep showing up and keep activating locally in all the ways that we've talked about, it is more important now than ever that we do it. Because 2020 is the game right now, like I keep saying, if he's not impeached, okay? So directing your action, again, Congress is back in session right now. So the other thing to remember is that there are benefits to doing it locally, and then there are benefits to doing it when they're all together on the Hill. And when they're all together on the Hill, it means that the public pressure that can be levied across multiple offices is more likely to have a difference, to make a difference. So calling everybody on House Judiciary and encouraging them to push forward on every aspect of what they're doing for impeachment is a good idea right now, and expressing support for people who are already there. This is the other thing I just want to remind you all of. The people who have already come out in favor of impeachment still need to hear from us. They still need to know that we're behind the effort, right? They still need to hear the force of our voices asking for the removal of the president, okay? So it's incredibly clear to me at this moment in time that this is the period in the marathon where we're white, right? I remember the New York Marathon, there's a spot that is kind of notorious for being the worst part of the New York Marathon. And then you come around and you run down the hill and you're going through the crowds heading towards Central Park. And that's the moment where we need the most cheering voices to keep people going, right? To push toward the finish line. So to use that analogy, we need to support each other. We also need to support the people who are on the front lines actually doing things to try to get him out of office. So that's an answer to that, okay? Okay, so the mental health issues were really on full display this weekend. And again, I want to be really mindful about this because it is incredibly important that we recognize that what we're witnessing in the president has not yet been diagnosed formally. Okay, and I want to say very clearly that I am not insulting. I'm not here talking about any of this in a way that is designed to insult people who are struggling with mental illness. Not at all. Okay. I've been very public, by the way, about the fact that I had postpartum depression after both my kids. I'm not at all critical. Okay. Here, I'm not saying everybody who is struggling with mental illness is what the president represents. Okay. I also think he's an incredible danger to democracy right now because he's not stable. And we saw him this weekend tweeting out cat videos after canceling a meeting with the Taliban at Camp David. Late last night, he insulted John Legend and Chrissy Teigen because he was mad about an MSNBC special on the state of criminal justice reform. And he did it in, incredibly foul terms. He went on Twitter and insulted Mark Sanford for having an affair when this is a president who had sex with a porn star after his wife gave birth to their son without a condom and paid her off in a campaign finance violation, right? The layers of this are present, right, in everything that we see him doing right now. And so, part of the difficulty here that I want to remind you all of is that we're all in a relationship right now with a toxic narcissist. It's kind of unavoidable, right? And he's got so much power and so much authority, and he's running an incredibly racist, neo-Nazi, white supremacist administration on top of everything else. So there's a lot of people in danger. There's a lot of threat. And then on top of it, we're being gaslighted and the behavior is completely unpredictable. The manner in which he's engaging with all of us and communicating with all of us is like being in, black ice, right? I mean, this is the way this has been described to me, by the way, previously by therapists in the context of being in relationships with toxic narcissists, is that you're going along and you think everything is stable. And then out of nowhere comes this, and you're off the road trying to steer the car, hold on to it, right? While you've got black ice underneath you and the entire foundation upon which you are driving is slippery and unstable. That's where we are right now, right? So from the standpoint of all of this, right, the one thing that I do want to say about it is that, your own self-preservation is key. We have talked about self-care on this broadcast from the very first time that I went live. And the other thing that is also really clear here is that the behavior is now, and it has been for quite some time, but I just want to say this. The behavior right now is so far beyond the pale that it is without question. And there was, by the way, a breaking article about this on Friday afternoon out of Business Insider. There is no question that the GOP knows that he is not well. And there are staffers inside the White House who are leaking to reporters saying that he's completely lost his shit. Like, that's a direct quote. He's lost his shit. So the difficulty with this particular position is that the GOP, of course, has sunk their claws into the president for the sake of maintaining power for all sorts of horrible reasons, right? The moment is arriving where the president is so stable that they cannot even rely upon him to carry out any of their agenda. That, by the way, in some sense, may actually not be a bad thing, because the moment that he is no longer useful to them, the moment that he is more trouble than he is worth, which I agree he has been for quite some time, but from the GOP standpoint, it's quite the different story. The moment where they think that he cannot be counted on to actually execute on what they're trying to accomplish will be the moment where the GOP changes course. And we've already seen some of that person by person, right? We've seen these mass number of resignations of people who no longer want to be associated with him. The thing is that in order for impeachment to be achieved, there's going to have to be a bulk number of senators who are willing to vote that way. And the way in which that may happen, that it could possibly happen, is that he is so far over the line that they can no longer trust him to do what they need him to do to enact their agenda. Now, that's going to bring all of you who are like, the Pence is horrible, we don't want him as vice president, people out of the woodwork. That's all true. What I will say, though, is that we can beat Pence in 2020. I actually have literally no fear about that whatsoever. If that's the way that this goes and the president is impeached and we have President Pence for 6 months or whatever the case may be, we'll beat him, and it will be a beatdown. It will not be pretty. Again, it's another reason why we have to keep in mind that, however painful this is right now, the decompensation of the president actually is having an impact now on the way in which he is perceived inside the GOP. It's too much. And I think it's not just us, right? That's the other thing I want to say about this. There are indications that even amongst his base, people are tired of the crazy. To the point where people are just unable to back him any longer because it's all just too nuts. So ironically enough, we need more of that, not more of his crazy, but more of that response. And we're going to need it going into 2020 in the event that he is not removed. And we're going to need a lot more Republicans standing up and saying, this is intolerable. This is intolerable. You don't, we can't have a president starting and then canceling a meeting with the Taliban at Prince David during the week of 9/11. And then an hour later tweeting out a cat video about his stupid map, right? We can't have the president going on Twitter and calling John Legend's wife a filthy mouthed woman or whatever it was that he did, for purposes of distracting from everything that's happening right now in the media. It's just, it's too much for all of us. And that actually, in my mind, is a good thing, because the moment where it becomes too much for the GOP, we actually might stand a chance of removing him completely. So that's that for today. Not a happy broadcast. I'm very sorry, but I'm looking here at my list of whatever it was, 11 things that I had to talk about, and all of them are more nuts than the last. Okay, so one quick final thing I want to mention, which is that the president tweeted out this morning that he had something like a 94% approval rating inside the GOP. I just want to remind you all that the polls on every level are not to be relied upon. Certainly not what's on the president's Twitter account, but also the polls about the Republicans, okay? Because one thing that's very clear is that the president has lost ground in all of the major swing states heading into 2020, and not by a little bit. We're talking by like 11, 12, 15, 20 percentage points. So you gotta like be very like, and this is one of the things I just want to say to you. Remember, polls are taken of like 1,000 people. Polls are taken sometimes only by people who are at home when the phone rings, and usually it's a landline at 6 o'clock at night. You have to be very mindful. I mean, again, this is my statistics class going all the way back to college, but you have to be very mindful that all of this can be manipulated and that not all of it is necessarily representative of the Republican Party at large. So keep that in mind, please, when you are looking at poll numbers, when you are looking at the things that you're seeing about like his approval ratings, okay? Again, you know, we have to activate, like our lives depend on it and like other lives depend on it because they do. And we have to assume that 2020 is going to be the battle of our lives. And we also have to remember that there are very serious indications that things are shifting in the public consciousness right now that may not necessarily be reflected in the polls. So that's that. And for those of you who are wondering about, you know, the president's Twitter feed and what's happening over there, I will just let you all know that, you know, like the bot activity, again, you should all go follow Christopher Bouzy, who runs Trollbot Sentinel. He had a baby last week. We were all on Twitter like rah rah for him. The amount of bot and troll traffic on Twitter right now is through the roof. And that is not going to stop between now and 2020. And, you know, like we should not be paying attention to accounts on Twitter that have maybe 6 followers and have not been active since 2011 or were just started in August of 2019, because I can pretty much guarantee you that if it's a name with a series of numbers after it and it's got no followers and it's got a weird setup behind it, no tweets, no activity, rebooted after the 2016 election or other indications that, you know, it's not real, it's not. Okay. So please, again, you know, this is one of those moments where educating yourself, having a really strong filter mechanism is incredibly important. And I'll just add one other thing here, because I've watched friends of mine, like actual real-time friends of mine, do this on Twitter. If it is somebody who looks like they are there to cause trouble, do not respond to them. You know, again, I haven't said this for a while on this broadcast, but it's important to say this. If you reply to somebody on Twitter, or for that matter on Facebook, who looks like they're there to be provocative, to cause trouble, to develop rage, to push through, you know, and somehow stir things up, your chances are very, very good that's a bot or a troll, but a bot at bare minimum is the first thing that I would assume. The more you engage, the more they will appear. And, you know, I have watched this happen in real time on my feed over and over and over again, where someone replies to an account that is obviously a bot. And the next thing you know, there's 15 more of them on that particular thread commenting. It happens all the time on Facebook. It happens all the time on Twitter. You must deal with your own emotional response, deal with the fact that this is psychological manipulation, and just not reply. That's your best bet. And, you know, you all know that we go through and we block without hesitation. Highly recommend that all of you do it as well. Instead of engaging, just hit the block button. Super easy, makes life so much better. And you know, you don't have to engage. And if you do it often enough, you end up with a fairly clean feed. All right, that's it for today. Longer broadcast today. Much love to all of you for being here. Thank you so much. So grateful to all of you who are sticking with us on Patreon. And reminder, we did have our weekly broadcast at the end of last week on Friday, which was the top 5 issues of the week. This one's going to be a doozy. I don't even know how I'm going to get to 5, because I could do 5 on just what's happened today. But much love to all of you, much gratitude, and I will talk to all of you tomorrow regular time. Thanks so much, everybody. All right, bye.